This is TWiT.
So I first want to start, just how were you inspired to write sci-fi? Like when did you start writing?
Yeah, so I can't remember a time when I didn't love science fiction. Like, my earliest memories of being a kid are of like being obsessed with Doctor Who and Star Trek and Star Wars, and reading The Phantom Tollbooth and reading A Wrinkle in Time and other stuff like that, and comics and stuff. And I don't know. And when I was really little, I had a huge learning disability. So I had this special education teacher who worked with me a lot to get me able to basically do the basic stuff they needed me to do in elementary school. Like, I was flunking out of first grade, basically. And she got me doing, kind of doing repetitive exercises, but the reward for that was if I figure out how to like actually make words on a page or whatever and do basic math and stuff, I would get to write a stage play that we actually had performed at the school. And later she had me make a fake newspaper. And, I was always just making up weird stories and stuff. That was kind of part of how I got through stuff. And I remember vividly being like in third or fourth grade and just writing lots and lots and lots of Doctor Who fanfic in like my little school exercise books instead of whatever I was actually supposed to be doing. And so I think that was like those were my first writing projects, was like kind of weird, silly, fantastical stuff and Doctor Who fanfic.
Well, I heard you say that that science fiction is the literature of problem solving.
Yeah. That's something that that's one of my like kind of maxims, I guess, because I think it's really true. And I think that, I think that sometimes we forget that. And I think that that's part of what makes science fiction so powerful, especially now that we have a lot of problems that we don't have easy solutions for. And, it used to be that science fiction, everybody kind of knew that science fiction was about like scientists and explorers who are like problem solvers, who are kind of can-do, resourceful, fix-it kind of people who just go into a situation and build a rocket ship out of like parts from a toaster or whatever, and like they just get the job done. And I feel like that's part of the lifeblood of science fiction to this day. And it's good that we have different kinds of characters, we have different kinds of heroes in science fiction, but I still, when I read science fiction books, I still get really excited and happy when I see characters who are figuring stuff out and solving problems and kind of working through stuff and being competent. And, I feel like the appeal of something like The Martian, which is very much a story about problem solving, and every single kind of twist in The Martian is this guy being presented with another problem and then solving it. I feel like that's part of what a lot of people, myself included, love about science fiction, is that it's not about just kind of running away from our problems. It's about like figuring out a solution and making it happen.
And so a lot of your books are about the future. And as we were talking before, your podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct, you were talking about futurism on a recent episode. And I was thinking about that. And, one of the things you said, one of the definitions, I think Rose Eveleth, your guest, said that one of the definitions of futurist is someone trying to make the future a better place.
Huh, yeah.
I think she said that. Did I make that up?
I mean, that sounds right. I love that.
And I
love that.
I spoke to Cory Doctorow earlier, and I said, I was kind of thought of him as a futurist, like just in terms of his activism role into science fiction. But he sort of took a little umbrage to that. Like, I don't think of myself as a futurist. Huh. I think there's sort of a negative connotation sometimes to futurism. What do you think about that?
I think that there's a bunch of parts to that. One thing is that a lot of science fiction writers don't want to be boxed into this role of like predicting the future. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of sci-fi writers will very emphatically say, I don't predict the future. Science fiction, even if it takes place in the future, is always about the present. It's always about this moment. And, we don't want to get stuck into this thing of like being kind of scored based on whether our predictions came true or not or whatever. And like, so I think there's that. And then there is this connotation now that futurism is a lot of, that it's a lot of kind of pie in the sky prognosticating of like, 5 years from now, we'll all have removable heads and we'll be able to like walk on the ceiling and like, we'll live for 1,000 years and just like, there is a school of futurism that kind of trades in kind of unrealistically either rosy scenarios or unrealistically disastrous scenarios. And, there's also the failure mode of futurism that just kind of extrapolates in a very straight line from whatever is happening at this exact moment. Like, every trend line will continue in a straight line forever. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think of myself as a futurist because I think that that's a really specific discipline. But I do think about the future a lot. I do, try to read other people thinking about the future, and I try to imagine plausible futures that feel like they could happen, not that I think that they will happen.
And do you ever write about futures that you don't want to happen? I mean, I know that I heard you talking about how you wrote a short story about drones, drone strikes before they were a thing, but then by the time the story was published, they were a thing.
Yeah, and that's a thing that happens a lot. If you write about like near future science fiction stuff and near future developments, you will get overtaken by events. This happens to Charles Stross a lot, I feel like, and it happens to other people I know. And people are having to rewrite their stuff at the last minute in real time because, things like Brexit and, just huge, like, I feel like there's a bunch of things that I've written where by the time they were published, they felt less like futurism and more like just describing here and now. And things often happen faster than you think they will. And, I think that there's a huge role for writing dystopian fiction and fiction about bad futures that we want to warn people about. And I definitely have done that. I've done that a bunch of times. I most notably, this story that came out a couple of years ago called Don't Press Charges and I Won't Sue was like an explicitly kind of dystopian story that was kind of warning and kind of trying to prepare us for like a terrible future. And it was kind of exaggerated and a little bit surreal, but also very much trying to like point to, this would be bad if this happened, kind of.